The movie begins at a business party in the Hollywood Hills where Edward Lewis is the guest of honor. Edward is a high-powered corporate raider from New York. He buys struggling companies, dismantles them and sells the assets for profit. In a different room away from the party, Edward is on the phone with his girlfriend. He asks her to accompany him on a business trip. She tells him that she has a life of her own, and that she is fed up being his beck-and-call girl. She then breaks up with him. Edward leaves the party early in his lawyer's car. The car is a Lotus Esprit sports car. His lawyer, Philip Stuckey, is worried that Edward doesn't know how to drive a stick shift and is visibly worried when Edward drives off in his car. Edward accidentally ends up on Hollywood Boulevard in the city's red light district. There he is spotted by call girl Vivian Ward and her best friend Kit DeLuca. Vivian is especially impressed by the sports car. Kit encourages Vivian to approach the car and propose an entanglement with the owner of the vehicle. Vivian approaches the sports car and Edward asks her for directions to Beverly Hills. Vivian agrees to show him, but at a fee. Edward protests at first but finally agrees and Vivian gets into the car. Vivian talks excitedly about the car and Edward admits that he doesn't know how to drive a manual transmission car. He asks her to drive him to the Regent Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where he is staying. At the hotel, Edward impulsively hires Vivian for the night. At the hotel lobby, Vivian gets looks from everyone because of how she's dressed. She is impressed that Edward is staying at the hotel's penthouse suite. Vivian asks Edward if he has a wife or a girlfriend. He tells her that he has an ex-wife and that he had just broken up with his girlfriend. Later that night, despite some awkwardness, Edward finds Vivian charming and gets entangled with her. The next morning, Edward sees Vivian without her wig and tells her that she looks better without it. She asks him what he does for a living. He tells her that he buys struggling companies, breaks them into pieces and then sells them at a profit. He adds that the company he is currently targeting was worth $1 billion. Edward then asks Vivian to play his girlfriend that week at a series of business events he will be attending while attempting a takeover of shipbuilder James Morse's company. Edward offers Vivian $3,000 and a new wardrobe for 6 days. Vivian excitedly agrees. Edward then gives her money to buy something conservative but elegant for their dinner that night with James Morse and his grandson. When Vivian attempts to go shopping on Rodeo Drive, she is turned away by a rude and snobbish saleswoman at the store. Distraught, she walks back to the hotel. She meets Barney, the hotel manager, at the entrance. Seeing how she's dressed, he wants to know if she's a visitor. Vivian tells him that she's a guest of Edward Lewis, and the bellboy confirms to Barney that she is telling the truth. Barney invites Vivian to his office and tells her that hotel policy requires guests to dress more appropriately. Vivian tells him how she was turned away while trying to purchase new clothes. Barney makes a call to a different store and arranges for her to buy a cocktail dress. Vivian goes to the store and gets a cocktail dress. Back at the hotel, she asks Barney for help and he agrees. He teaches her proper etiquette and how she should conduct herself at the important dinner that evening. When Edward gets to the hotel, he is left speechless by Vivian's elegance. He tells her that she looks stunning and takes her to dinner. At the dinner meeting, Edward introduces Vivian to James and his grandson David. David is being groomed to take over the company after his grandfather dies. The business meeting does not go well and James and David are unimpressed by Edward wanting to buy and sell off their company. Edward is impressed by Vivian's transformation and opens up to her. He reveals details about his personal and business life. He even tells her about his turbulent relationship with his late father Carter, from whom he was estranged at the time of his death. The following morning, Edward gives Vivian his credit card and tells her to go buy more clothes for herself. Vivian tells him how mean and snobbish the saleswomen were. Edward decides to take her shopping himself. Edward tells the store manager that he is planning to spend an obscene amount of money at the store, and that he needs the shop attendants to suck up to Vivian and to tend to her every need. She is immediately surrounded by attendants and stylists, and she gets to buy several expensive and stylish outfits. Vivian then leaves the store and walks to the store on Rodeo Drive, where she had rudely been turned away the day before. She completely snubs one of the attendants and then asks the snobbish saleswoman if she remembered her. She tells the saleswoman that she made a huge mistake turning her away, since she would have made a huge commission from her purchases. She then proceeds to leave the store, saying she's going to do more shopping. Back at work, Edward's attorney Philip expresses his concern to Edward, who had not been his usual ruthless self that week. The next day, Edward takes Vivian to a polo game. He tells her that he is there for business purposes. They meet with Philip, who introduces Vivian to his wife. Philip deduces that Vivian is the reason Edward had been off his game that week and is not pleased. While socializing, David, James Morse's grandson, spots Vivian and introduces himself. Philip spots them and suspects that Vivian is a corporate spy. He approaches Edward with his suspicions and tells him that Vivian may be taking information back to James Morse and committing corporate espionage. Edward tells him not to worry, since Vivian is only a call girl and that he picked her up in Philip's car. Philip later crudely propositions Vivian for her services after Edward is finished with her. Vivian is hurt and furious at Edward for exposing her. She tells him that no one had ever made her feel as cheap as he did. Vivian goes to prepare her things as she prepares to leave. She tells Edward to pay her before she leaves. Edward hands her the money and walks off. Vivian decides not to take the money and leaves the hotel room. Edward apologizes, revealing he was jealous of Vivian talking to David, and realizes Vivian's straightforward personality is rubbing off on him. Vivian decides to stay but warns Edward not to hurt her again. The following day, Edward takes Vivian by private jet to see La Traviata at the San Francisco Opera. The story of a call girl who falls in love with a rich man moves Vivian to tears. That night, Vivian asks Edward to take the day off the following day and not go to work. Edward agrees. The next day, Philip is surprised to hear that Edward is taking the day off, since he had never done that before. Edward and Vivian spend their day at the park. Vivian later breaks her no making out rule while getting entangled with Edward. After mistakenly believing Edward is asleep, Vivian admits she loves him. Since his business in Los Angeles is almost over, Edward's return to New York is imminent. He tells Vivian that he would really like to see her again. He offers to help Vivian get off the streets and suggests putting her up in a nice condo, getting her a car and giving her an allowance, promising to visit her regularly. Vivian is offended by the offer, since Edward is still treating her like a call girl. She recalls that as a little girl, her mom used to lock her up in the attic whenever she got into mischief, and that it was her childhood fantasy that a knight on a white steed would come and rescue her from her abusive home. Edward then gets a call from Philip telling him that James Morse had found himself cornered and was finally willing to sell his company. Edward tells him to set up the meeting immediately. At the meeting, Edward tells everyone that he would like to speak to James alone. He also tells Philip to leave the room. Once they are alone, Edward tells James that he no longer wishes to buy his company and take it apart. He tells him that he chooses to work with him to save his company instead of dismantling it. When Philip learns about this, he is furious that Edward's new direction has cost him a fortune. He goes to the hotel to confront him but finds only Vivian. Vivian invites him in to wait for Edward. Philip blames Vivian for Edward's changing character. He hits her and attempts to force himself on her. Edward arrives just in time and pulls Philip away. He punches him and then fires him. Philip tells Edward that he doesn't deserve this, since he had devoted 10 years of his life to him. Edward retorts by telling Philip that he only loved the money, not working for him, and tells him to get out. Edward proceeds to nurse Vivian's wounds. She tells him that she is proud of him for not buying out James Morse's company to sell it for profit. She then excuses herself and tells Edward that she is leaving. Edward proceeds to pay her for her services and gives her his business card, telling her to call him if she ever needed anything. Just as she is about to leave, Edward asks Vivian to stay with him one more night, but only if she wants to, not because he will pay. She gently refuses and leaves. At the hotel lobby, Barney arranges for a chauffeur to take Vivian and her luggage back to her apartment. Back at her apartment, Vivian packs her things and prepares to move to San Francisco. She plans to go back to school and quit the call girl business. She gives her best friend and roommate kid some of the money she had made. Edward checks out of the hotel and prepares to go to the airport for his flight back to New York. As he leaves, Barney tells Edward about him arranging for the chauffeur to take Vivian to her apartment. Edward rethinks his life. And while being driven to the airport, he has the chauffeur make a detour to Vivian's apartment building. He picks flowers on his way and gets Vivian's attention by blasting La Traviata from the San Francisco Opera. He climbs out through the white limousine sunroof and ascends the fire escape to rescue Vivian, just like the night in her fantasy. They then make out passionately. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like to help with the channel's growth. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to watch more videos like this.